So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Water Cooler Chat, where we talk about all things Livepeer, whether it's delegating, orchestrating, broadcasting, developing, or anything to do with the Livepeer ecosystem. We're here to ask questions and get answers. We've got a few topics ahead of us, as well as a Q&A, or I guess just a discussion, community discussion, around the selection algorithm. So we'll start off with that topic. Hunter, do you want to quickly introduce us into what you're thinking and the topic in general, and kick us off?
Yeah, certainly. So as a preface, there have been a lot of conversations over the course of the past few months and frankly years about what selection looks like in the Livepeer world. And a couple of things I want to call out just as we start this discussion. So first of all, the Go Livepeer, while Livepeer Inc. is obviously a really important contributor to that piece of software, Go Livepeer itself is just one implementation of the Livepeer protocol. And what this means is that any broadcaster can theoretically implement their own selection algorithm. And I think in a broader sort of end game scenario, you're likely to have many broadcasters with many different choices about how to do selection. That said, I do recognize that the implementation in Go Livepeer, created by Livepeer Inc., at least the canonical implementation of it, it is likely to dictate much of the selection on the protocol at present. So I think we're well aware of the current dynamics of the network and are certainly keeping that in mind. Over the course of the past few months, this is really starting to become a priority. In due in part to some of the concerns raised by the community about how randomness factors into selection, what that means for Sybil resistance, things like that, but also in terms of price and performance. And I think what's really become clear is that the algorithm as currently implemented in the canonical implementation is not doing a very good job of prioritizing performance, price, or some balance thereof. So our interest from a Livepeer Inc. perspective as core contributors to the canonical implementation of the protocol in Go Livepeer is to put something out there that is a really reasonable way to distribute work on the network, but moreover is something that other broadcasters can easily tune to their specific preferences. Because there are a lot of cases where someone might choose to prioritize performance over price or price over performance, or add their own criteria in some way. So I think it makes sense to have a base opinionated algorithm in Go Livepeer, but it really needs to be tunable. So I think that those are some of the core considerations here. So I do want to get into, of course, all of the tenets that we're taking into account when starting to do this implementation. But I do want to pause there for reactions to the overall approach. I think I'll pause there, and then we can dive into some of the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll open it up now to the community. Does anyone want to comment on what Hunter just spoke about and their opinions on the current selection algorithm?
This is Brad. I think all of us, or most of us, would like to see the other factors mixed into it, and I agree that it should be tunable. I've said that plenty of times on the thread and in conversations before, but I think this also goes in with this to add a wrinkle, the verification process, Hunter, or the verifiable video type stuff that you guys are working on. Because as you open it up to possibly broadcasters being able to pick lower stake nodes or deprioritize stake in general, being able to have some ability to feel good that yes, the orchestrators did the work they were supposed to do and they sent it back as you would expect them to.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the question there? Like I certainly do think that like stake does and should continue to play a role here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it shouldn't. I think it should too. But the fact of the matter is, like, we don't have slashing right now. There is no like ability to punish an orchestrator for doing bad things. Now, the network performs the work as it's supposed to, in my findings, and I'm sure in your findings too, in your guys' findings at Livepeer Inc., that the network does the work it's supposed to do. But like right now, I think the verification, when it's turned on by default, I think it checks like resolution and pixel counts or something. I can't remember exactly what it checks, but I think you guys were working on something on the verification side of things, and I think my only point is that with a pretty good verification mechanism, that the work was done correctly as you expected it. I think that makes broadcasters feel better about prioritizing different things or choosing different methods of prioritization.
Yeah, that point is really well taken. So just to draw a quick line here, verifiable video is focused just around identifying content provenance, whereas like fast and full verification are around actually verifying that the work that an orchestrator did reflects the work that was requested of them by a broadcaster. So there's a line there. I definitely agree with you that this is a critical thing for the Livepeer ecosystem to get right. And I think you can expect a little more focus on that, at least from our perspective, over the coming months. I think right now, the one bit of that I would challenge is that there's no penalty to like doing work, right? Like, there's a question of how you detect it, but things like having an orchestrator block list do introduce some modicum of penalty, even if there's not protocol enforced slashing.
Yeah, I agree with that. It becomes kind of like the social layer to me, right? The social layer of the punishment, where the broadcasters and the community at whole kind of, it's not really an enforcement, but they kind of point out, hey, this isn't going right, this isn't working right, we should try to fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, like I entirely hear you, and you're correct that there should be a better way to do this in the long term, a more automated way, a way that's a little more reliable rather than just someone just like pointing something out. That definitely heard.
Otherwise, apologize for the tangent, but I like the possibility of opening it up to different ways of selection in an effort to try to get rid of the randomness part, but actually the randomness part becomes based on the price or performance, so it's more network centric, and the focus is then on providing a good product and end product to the users.
My add a little bit. I think I don't know.
Like, you're cutting out pretty good.
You're cutting out,
problem, and
yeah.
I think it's probably always going to end up being. All right, let me jump back here for a second and see.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to hear. What I'll do, Hunter, is we'll continue until Mike comes back with a better microphone. Hunter, do you want to continue on down? If you had an agenda at all, you wanted to go down and discuss more deeper on your topics.
Yeah, sure. I guess I can just start by talking about a few principles for canonical selection, and we can go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So first, before I dive into some of the principles here, I want to note that these will all basically be, or at least the intention right now, is to structure all of these as weights, right? Where a broadcaster could take each of these factors and decide how much to weight any given one of them. For example, if you take price and performance as factors, someone who is serving ultra low latency live traffic might really want to prioritize is performance rather than price to ensure that they're getting the best experience possible. Whereas someone who's just like doing things, doing VOD jobs asynchronously might not care quite as much about performance and want to prioritize low price. So with that said, a few principles that we are looking at as we design this implementation is first to prioritize acceptable performance over everything else. And so acceptable, of course, would be determined by the broadcaster standards. Secondly, to distinguish between performance in different regions. I think that's a big problem that we have right now. The current algorithm, it does like a basic ping check during the discovery process. But it doesn't do a good job of then picking an orchestrator who is performing well in the region where the stream is coming from. So like if an orchestrator performs well in Chicago, we shouldn't immediately flood them with a bunch of traffic from Tokyo. Thirdly, we want to continue using LPT stake as a factor. I think the delegation process is a critical part of the Livepeer ecosystem and the Livepeer network. And I think we've talked a lot about like whether and to what extent the current distribution of stake reflects actual performance. I think that starting to include performance in selection will start to drive stake in different ways, because it'll start to meaningfully route fees to the orchestrators who are performing better. Fourthly, allowing orchestrators to compete on price. Pretty straightforward. This would also be coupled with updates allowing orchestrators to set specific prices for live and VOD jobs, as well as for specific orchestrators, which we know is a pretty big pain point right now. And this entire update doesn't really work without it. Fifth, reducing or potentially removing randomness. The focus of this would be allowing orchestrators to compete on performance and price. Current perspective is that the the Sybil resistance problems that we've run into are a protocol issue rather than a selection algorithm issue. And you can try to attach like selection algorithm band-aids to it, but fundamentally it's a protocol question rather than a selection problem. And finally, just being easy to update by anyone running a broadcast node. This shouldn't be something where you need deep technical knowledge to understand how you can tweak your selection algorithm. It should be something that is really accessible. So I'll pause there for comments because I'm sure there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, I would say just to first off, I like the idea of going towards a more performance-based algorithm just for the sake of like the network itself being healthier for the end user. I think the stake-weighted selection, the randomness factor was really helpful right at the Arbitrum upgrade because stake was so much more skewed back then and it's gotten a lot better now. But yeah, I agree that if we can start moving towards broadcaster specific once and then like tweaking them that way, then then that would just be the best option going forward.
Like really the overall intent here is to move toward like actual honest to God competitive market dynamics.
Yeah. Well, and I like the recent upgrade that Brad proposed or committed, which was like fixing the ping time response from the orchestrators, because I think that was actually I actually think that will tighten up a lot of the issue of sending streams from Japan to Chicago, because the current default algorithm allows for 500 milliseconds to respond, but that includes basically every orchestrator on the globe as long as you respond. But the only reason it was like that is because of this RPC issue where, you know, the RPC response time was included in the ping response. So now that like ping responses are legitimate, like this is, you're actually roughly 8 milliseconds away, or then I think the default selection algorithm could even crunch that limit, that timeout limit, to like maybe 100 milliseconds. And so you've already built in more performant selection algorithm right off the hop by doing something like that, right? So like I think those can just continually be fine-tuned and fixed over time.
Yeah, I agree with that. Though I would note that when we're talking about performance, ping time is only indicative of so much, right? Like it almost incentivizes the wrong things if your performance is dictated by ping time, because then you just like golf your ping time down and don't think about the rest of your stack, especially if you're running an OT split.
No, I understand that. That's why we still need to just have but 500 milliseconds, that might just be, well, it's just a delay in the time that your stream has to start, because you have to wait for 500 milliseconds for everyone to respond, right? So if we can shave that down a bit, the only reason it was at 500, I believe, is because otherwise not many orchestrators would actually respond fast enough, because the RPC time was arbitrarily included in that response, right? But yeah. But like
understood.
But
Just
like
wanted to
you
call
said,
out that, like,
yeah,
round trip performance is different. Yeah.
I mean, hey, ping, it doesn't really matter. You could be 1 millisecond away, but if you're transcoding on a potato, then it's still worse, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So no, that makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, those are just my 2 cents. Does anyone else
Hunter,
have any comments?
Yeah, Hunter, have you put any thought towards, like, I run test streams and Livepeer Inc. runs test streams, but the performance factor on like a cold start, right, of a broadcaster, how have you envisioned that they get performance metrics? They just gonna piggyback off Livepeer Inc. or, you know, other broadcasters' test streams, or are they gonna, you know, is everybody start at say 1 or a fine performance ratio, right, and then it updates from there?
So yeah, maybe I should have clarified this a little better. These performance, like the measuring of performance, would be entirely up to the broadcaster. I think it's to be determined whether we'll expose our own test scores or not. You know, they're actually available in the Explorer via public API right now, as there's no reason a broadcaster couldn't do that. But I don't think it's the right thing for a public network to rely on test scores from a single private entity. I would actually, like, in the longer term, I would love to see something like, Brad, your test scores that the community sort of coalesces around, and then that becomes the canonical one. And then broadcasters can choose to take that or use something else. But I think like it'll be structured as more of a runtime configuration. Okay, check this ordered list that you get.
Then like Eli said something about that too. Like I don't know if it's a community-based testing apparatus or whatever, but you post it as a JSON file on S3 or something that can get pulled in by the webhook of it. Right now, this is getting a little too technical, but it's basically just a list of orchestrators' scores by region, right? And you just wherever your broadcaster is, you said, hey, look at this URL. This is going to give you some performance scores to start with, and then you can kind of go from there, or the broadcaster can go from there.
Right. I think that's along the same conceptual lines.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Any thoughts on weights that you want to talk about? Initial weights,
I don't think we're, like, at least in our designs, we're not at the point of assigning weights yet. Honestly, I think that's going to take some iteration to get right.
I agree.
Yeah, we will just have to see how some of these things perform in the wild. There's only so much you can simulate.
Yeah, I was on the thing I added to my testing sites. I messed with it a number of times, and it's more difficult than it seems.
Yeah.
I feel like to put something together that looks fair, feels fair, and keeps the lower staked orchestrators involved, because you don't want the bottom third or bottom half of the orchestrators on the network to just be non-existent or not paying attention, and it's just like zombies, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think that like as soon as we introduce price and performance competition, we're going to see a pretty drastic shift in how streams are distributed. Um, and that might wind up dinging some orchestrators who are on the lower half, or even some orchestrators who are on the upper half, but just haven't thought about performance deeply. Upper half in terms of stake, I mean.
Would you keep the performance score as it currently is, or are like planning on changing the factors that count as performance?
Are you referring to the current test stream scores, just like what's on the Explorer?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it would likely stay roughly the same. I think the role that it plays in selection would change, especially with regards to regional scores.
So, but then it's mostly based on latency, right?
Round trip time for segments, I think, is what it's going to look more like. I forget what exactly determines the ones on the Explorer right now.
I mean, it shows both basically.
Okay.
I mean, it shows the round trip time. Sorry, is really what you see the most on the Livepeer selection thing. I also like some of the stuff that Brad's added. Where you actually see like first code or first segment transcode time, and then subsequent times, because as been brought up, and what Lee was talking about or wanted to bring up later, is that there's a big difference between that first segment and the following ones. That warm up period, I guess. So it would be interesting to see if something like that could be incorporated into whatever it ends up being used as the performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's probably going to be a lot of room to optimize not just the weights, but also get more sophisticated in how we actually measure performance. Because like you're right that like a cold start should be treated a little bit differently. Like there are all kinds of factors like that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
speaking just one little interesting thing that I've found, and this is something also that Brad is. Maybe, I don't think I found it, but Brad brought it up to me one time just in chat, that for orchestrators that are getting a lot of work, they don't have the same cold start as an orchestrator who isn't getting as much work. So I don't even know how you would evaluate, or what would be a fair way to evaluate that, because it may actually not be as much of an issue with the PR that
Yeah, I think that was
caches
mostly around the RPC part of the get orchestrator
yeah.
request.
As I'm saying that, I'm kind of stopping myself because I realize that I guess we've
But
already
the
kind of
PR
solved
is
that.
not
But yeah,
merged yet. It's not merged
Yeah.
yet. So I mean, all signs point to yes.
Can you
still.
guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. So I was thinking of, there's comments I have first on this topic we're talking about now, is that, I think if we look at performance today based on those test scores, where it's missing is, where an orchestrator is currently busy. Let's say he's got 50 streams, his GPU's tapped out, and how do you know not to go to him at that point, right? Like if he's normally a high performer, how do you take into consideration the current capacity of the orchestrator, right? Like I think that's a factor that's probably needs to be thought of. But to my earlier point, which I wanted to make, was in whatever way you go on the selection algorithm and also on performance metrics, each of them should be done in a modular way that the community can create these modules that test and tweak different algorithms and different cost structures and optimize for certain use cases. So whatever you do and however it works, I would recommend at least starting point is having that modularity in place so that anyone can build modules that will plug into this framework to do the testing. And I think that'll unlock a lot of possibilities. But it gives the Livepeer Inc. a way to iterate and test, because you're not going to find the right answer on the first try. I can almost guarantee you that. You have first try already, right? And that's not, we see the needs changes. So I think you're going to need to iterate, and there's going to have to be several tests over time to prove it. So modularity probably works out very well if you can do it in a way that's baked in.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with you on modularity. I know you were hopping in and out with some internet issues. I think that's one of the core principles that I outlined, right? Is making it so it's something that is simple for the community, for any other broadcaster to interact with. I think like it's probably going to look a little bit more like a webhook architecture than a traditional modular like plugin kind of thing. But yes, definitely agree on modularity. Orchestrator currently busy. That's a really interesting question on performance. Let me take that to the team and get back to you.
Right now, it sends back an orchestrator cap response, and that shouldn't penalize in the testing.
That's a basic metric on, like, if I say I have 10 streams capacity, if it hits 10, it'll stop receiving more, right? And that's artificial. I can put 1,000 in there, and if I get to my hardware limits 500, it'll blow up, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely that piece is woefully inadequate, and being able to determine my capacity at this moment with my, how many streams am I running currently, and how much more capacity could I put into the system. I think that those are very different.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. I appreciate that input.
Ultimately, you want, right, people to have that capacity. Like, and the other part is, if there was a surge in demand on the Livepeer network, and these individual orchestrators that have individual GPUs, how much of that demand would they be able to absorb before the network would be, unable to transcode properly? Like, because if you take one out, the selection is going to go to the next guy. He takes him out. Like, how many orchestrators fail because they just don't have enough hardware behind it? We've all struggled with idle GPUs right now, right? So being able to have that elasticity to the network so that it can expand when demand comes up. A lot of single orcs, they may get capped out to a point where you can't scale higher.
I think that's kind of a separate question, right? About how orcs go about scaling. Yeah,
it is.
Because I don't like, yeah, I don't know if this is the exact right forum for it, but like I've had conversations with several orchestrators, a couple of whom are on this call, about like what it actually looks like to scale, and the timelines that orchestrators would need to actually scale capacity. So I think that like we're not going to get caught by surprise on most of this stuff, right? Like the limiting factor right now is not, excuse me. The way that we would get hit by surprise right now is like a video going viral. But that's not going to hit transcode capacity. That's going to hit delivery capacity. Anything else, I think that everyone here would have a little bit of advance notice about.
Yeah, no, that's good to point out. Thank you.
That also goes to my point of keeping all the orchestrators engaged as best as possible.
Yeah.
If the bottom 50 get one stream a month, they're not going to hang around. They're not going to be engaged. They're not going to pay attention for the most part, right?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, like the bottom 50 aren't on this call right now, and if we're in a situation where we need to have that conversation, like it's everyone in this room that is going to need to think about how to scale. It's the people who are engaged, who already have contingency plans for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's fair, and I'm not trying to say it's an easy thing to try to solve, or if it can be solved. It's very difficult, I believe.
But my hope would be that like if that situation arises, the capacity that people in this room are able to provide, coupled with the capacity that private organizations, including Livepeer Inc., are able to provide, would suffice for the short term, and then the network would respond and provide a truly elastic source once the scale of demand became clear.
Right. Everyone's making
Mike,
a choice with their hardware today. And again, I think folks see, we know what capacity is needed, so we're going to scale down to meet that need. We're not going to pay for unnecessary hardware. But as the demand starts to increase and improve, each orchestrator is bound to start provisioning it. And again, in that scenario, you would have the ETH fees and the, and such that you could still get, when more demand comes in, your revenue you generate also goes up.
Yep.
And
Yep,
Mike,
exactly.
just to clarify for me, I might not be understanding this. Are you saying possibly exposing the capacity, like for a way that the broadcaster can see how much capacity each orchestrator has, and that'd be a factor in the selection? Or
No, what I'm saying is, as you start to look at performance, it's easy to sit and look at a static test that goes out, on a periodic interval and say, oh, okay, this is the number. But what you really want to make sure you include in that number is, what is the system load at the time the test came in? So like, if your performance scores were horrible because you were at 90% system usage, right? That's going to be a bad score. But that doesn't mean your capacity is bad. You could be, like Vire situation where he's getting hammered, right? He's got a lot of work. That's a great thing. But again, he could be running hot. And when a test stream comes in, it'll say, oh, he's poor, don't send work to him. But really, he's doing 50 streams, right now. How could he be poor? You know what I mean? Like, he will be poor for that test because he was under duress. But he's, if you factor in the capacity of the transcode or the orchestrator, in addition to its performance, you'll say, oh, he's at 90% capacity and the test stream came in, we're just going to throw this test away because it's not relevant, right? We know he has capacity. We know he has performance because he's currently being used in that way.
can't that be solved by just averaging test scores instead of just using the
You
last one?
need the historical data, but I think the most pertinent is what is he doing now, right? Like, if I'm going to send more work to an existing orchestrator and he's busy, it's probably better to go to the next tier, right? To go to the next orchestrator and see, where you, again, this is just like workload distribution stuff, right? When someone's busy versus whether they're idle. An idle orchestrator like Vires would have, super fast performance scores because, he has the capacity there. But once you reach your limit, then it becomes, how do you smooth out that distribution curve?
Yeah, and my argument would be that the orchestrators should set their max sessions to an appropriate level, that when they get to that point and the performance starts to degrade, they should start not accepting work.
That's a fair point, because sooner or later they'll just get like blacklisted or something if they keep screwing up requests and they set their caps at an unreasonable.
Part of the issue with that, though, is like, I've had times where I've had like 3 streams on a transcoder that are using like pretty much all the resources, but there are other times where it can handle 20 no problem, just depending on the stream that's coming in.
Yeah, that's fair
So
too.
it's really hard.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
Yeah,
streams used to
4K
be
is not the same as 720p decoding.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you know what the current workload looks like on that orchestrator that's busying him, that's I mean, again, this, to Hunter's point, is like, this is deep. Like, this is really involved. There's a lot of factors and variables involved. And I just re-echo my point about modularity and iterating, but this isn't easy. I'm just saying, as you start to scratch the detail under the surface from these things, you start to really see how complex this is going to end up being. Again, hardware, GPUs that people run matter, right? Like, if you have less RAM and you have, an older card, or less, some of the newer cards that maybe don't do the encoding and decoding as quickly, those factors come in as well. Quality is another one. But again, that's deep. And I don't think that Hunter's at the position to say, let's go that deep. But these are factors that need to be built in over time in order for you to be competitive with Web 2.
Yeah, I think, like, to sum up, there's definitely a long road to hoe here. Like, this is not going to get, we're not going to get it right 100% on day one. We'll have to iterate. And I agree that modularity is an important component of that. So I need to jump at one. So I had one other thing I wanted to cover here. And I want to make sure we have enough time. So if it's good with you all, I'm gonna switch topics real quick.
Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so as we started rethinking how selection works and how selection should work, another thing that became clear was doing pricing just in pure way isn't really a feasible way for broadcasters to operate. So with this, our intention is to move to pricing that's pegged to USD, but remains in ETH. So rather than just like paying X amount per pixel, that amount would fluctuate based on, at least from a deployment perspective for live peering fees, that amount would fluctuate based on probably Chainlink's ETH/USD value. So this would presumably, I'm not ready to state an exact value for where we'd set it for live and VOD jobs, but I would note that since the last time we set prices, ETH price has changed somewhat significantly. So I would expect some price cap changes for the Livepeer broadcasters in conjunction with this update. So I'll pause there. Want to open the floor since I know this is an issue that hits close to home.
So the chain link price would be something that would be more stable. You're saying is that you'd be able to control the fluctuations more, and the values you set would be more permanent or longer term, and that
Well,
today you're having to adjust because it's fluctuating. Is that what you're saying?
well,
I'm just
so,
trying to
so far,
understand.
right now we haven't been in adjusting, right? The VOD price has been what, like 900 way per pixel, and the live price has been like 1200 way per pixel.
But is
What
that
the
overpriced in your opinion?
I think it's pretty dramatically overpriced, especially if you consider the returns that
Okay.
delegators are getting. Delegators are getting 30+% returns in some cases. I think that's far too high and out of alignment with most other DPoS protocols, even if you account for the risk premiums. But I would note, just to talk about the technicals for a second. This would basically mean adjusting the price on a much more frequent basis in an automated fashion, say every day, based on the spot price of ETH to USD. And of course, we would build tooling around this to make it so it's not like a giant pain in the ass for you guys to manage a changing price.
So
Right. I was going to say that goes back to the auto adjust flag, right? Where it used to be able to control the price based on its fluctuations, and you could set it dynamically. Sorry, go ahead.
well, that was for gas. I think that was the main purpose for the auto adjusting, was to adjust for the gas price. If I'm
Well, no, I was using it in his context, right? Where he said they're going to provide tooling so that the orchestrators don't have to constantly be in there, like changing their prices,
right, but
trying to keep up with the market rate.
Hunter, is it also maybe more like that we would kind of set our price in basically the equivalent of like USD, and the way price would just fluctuate or change to be equivalent of, let's just say it was, you had it at 50 cents for whatever amount of transcoding it would just change the way to be equivalent to 50 cents in US.
Something like that. I think realistically, you're going to see a variety of approaches from different orchestrators to handling in this scenario. Keep in mind, by the way, that the selection algorithm updates that we introduced encourage competition on price. So that's another factor here, right? Like, you can certainly, like, the tooling we implement. I don't know precisely what it's going to look like at this point. But say it just it allows you to accept whatever price the ink broadcaster is sending. That may not be the strategically best approach for your specific orchestrator. So I expect to see a broad array of approaches here.
Fair enough.
I think overall would be a good thing. It is weird trying to build something on top of an asset that does fluctuate 30%, 50% in a year. Because then, as a broadcaster, just setting, it doesn't actually make sense just to set it at 800 WAY per pixel and leave it for a year, because if that increases or decreases by 50%, like that's a huge unknown factor. And if you're doing budgeting of any kind, then yeah, having a more stable asset, whether it be USD or something else pegged to it that is more digestible, I think is going to be a positive. And then I think on top of that, the other benefit is the optics of the project probably get better as well. Because right now we could run around saying, Livepeer is up to 50 times cheaper than the competitor. And it's like, okay, based on what day of the year? Because, it doesn't always stay there, right? So if we have something pegged to, US dollars, where we could say something like, hey, instead of Amazon's $3 an hour for transcoding, we can provide it at 30 cents. And you're going to get that 30 cents as a broadcaster because you can set it at 30 cents. I think not only the optics would look better, but it would look better for the entire network as a whole. And it doesn't have to be USD specifically. I mean, if we don't have to be partial to the United States. We could use gold or something. I mean, Bitcoin, but Bitcoin probably falls into the same issue, but use gold then. I don't know, pick something stable, right? But I think, US dollars is definitely the most relatable just because of the nature of most services being priced in that anyway.
Yeah, and you can argue, should it be a euro instead? Honestly, it just comes down to broadcaster preference at that point, right? Like we're talking about the canonical implementation here, and I think that for canonical, it's not that hard to swap out. Like if we're using the Chainlink ETHUSD Oracle versus the Chainlink ETH Euro Oracle, it's a similar idea.
Yeah. No, I think that would be a good improvement.
Cool. I mean, okay, so that's all I got. But feel free. I'm always online. Just hit me up if you want to chat about any of this stuff. I know there's a thread going on for some of the selection stuff. But really, thank you to everyone for your input today. They're really helpful and gave me some things to think about. So I appreciate it.
Hunter, do you?
Thanks for bringing the ideas to the table before implementing them, because the worst thing to be going in without feedback. So thank you for listening.
Yep, of course, always.
Hunter, do you have a time frame or timeline with these types of upgrades, or are you just generating feedback in the
Great question. ASAP, I think, is the gist of it. I don't think we're going to have something within the week, but within the month, I think is a very reasonable expectation. And I'll of course, keep this the orchestrator community in the loop as this progresses. You'll have a little bit of lead time before we just throw out a new binary and say, "Here, have fun."
Definitely.
Let me know if I can help at all, Hunter.
Right on. I appreciate that, Brad.
Yeah.
And Mike, I'll make sure to update you specifically about the approach to system load.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Right on.
Right on.
I want to thank you, Hunter, for coming and joining us and bringing up this topic. I really do appreciate the time into your day, and I think it's very exciting as we harden the network and make it better for future broadcasters to join in. So I like it.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, and thanks as always for the hard work.
Cool. Thank you, Hunter. Okay. Let's move on to a couple more topics. The next topic, which was going to be Hunter wanted to hear about, but we're going to talk about the first segment, transcode times. This was John's topic. John, do you want to take us through what you have found? I'm eager to hear if you found any solution to this problem.
Sure. Yeah. So For the longest time, I've had two different orchestrator boxes. They're combined OTs, and one of them was always run pretty fast. The other one, started noticing with Brad's metrics that he'd built that the first segment was very slow. And then we started seeing, we're monitoring across the network. A few other orchestrators had first segments that were slow. And after making, so many changes to the NVIDIA drivers, making sure they were persistently loaded into memory, we still couldn't find a solution. So we were looking a bit closer, and we noticed that we were using a service account, like a no logon. And this is in the context of a Linux server, but it may apply to Windows as well. We're using a Linux service account that did not have a home directory, so it's like no logon type of user. And when we set it up as a user that had a home directory, what we found was that the transcode time on the first segment normalized like the others. So it's really interesting finding it. It seems, I haven't been through the code to try to prove this out, but it looks like there may be some code, at least in the transcoder side, that's looking at that home directory, even if you have like data directory set to something else, which you would in this case, because the default is home directory for writing segments to disk. On that first segment, it's doing something related to the home directory. So once we created the home directory with that account, then now it runs just fine. And one way we proved it was...
Isn't the... Sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just rumbling on, but we tried it with like a non-service account, instead of just running as one, it ran in, as a regular user that had a home directory, and noticed that it ran perfectly fine.
And just to level set real quick, John's node, his other node was transcoding in 1.3 seconds the first segment, and his fast one's 154 milliseconds. And on our EU node that we've been working on, it was like 1.8 seconds. Adding a home directory to the same user got it down to like 200 milliseconds on the first segment in transcoding. So it's substantial.
So I'm going to assume that this is the binary install, because the Docker install by default will have you create, there's a home directory that's part of the Docker image. So like there's a user in there. So you won't see this if you're running Docker, but the code uses the home directory of the user that's currently running as a way to store the LP data and to look up the folder LP data, whatever you specify for that folder. That folder has to exist in that home directory, because it does look at the user's home dir to find out where to either create the folder or read the folder. So there's definitely code that looks at that home dir, and if you don't have one, I can't imagine that's going to help your performance.
Well, you can set the data directory too, and on the EU node, at least in our case, running the same transcoder in Docker gets you right back to the 1.8 seconds. I don't know why. The whole Docker NVIDIA runtime might be messed up, but for that particular box, that's what's happening.
So if you ran the binary and you ran Docker on that box and you still had the performance problem? Wow.
Yep.
And it could be related to permissions as well, or like the way you've mounted your volume. That's sort of something to do more testing on. Another question we're not sure of yet, too, is if it's related for orchestrators as well. So a little more testing needed to confirm that. But the expectation is that, if you're using data directory, it should just read and write all those segments to that data directory. And, we're just assuming that it's doing something with the home directory due to the latency. It's something like, with that kind of latency, it's probably, trying to write, catching an error, and then going to data directory, something like that.
But if you have a data directory, it doesn't change the fact that you still have a .lp data, right, under the user dir?
No, it
does.
does. You don't have the LP data anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay. I don't use that flag, but I didn't realize that.
On the EU node, it was like I had set a data directory, but there was no home folder set for the user.
Wow.
And it was still returning that horrible transcode time. Adding a home directory of one folder up, like it was the same like folder tree, right? But I added a home directory to that system user, one folder up, and it changed everything. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So there's still more testing. We have to try to figure this out.
Jeez.
It's a common security measure to have like a no logon user, and those users don't come with home directories usually. So that's kind of how that tends to be a pattern, it looks like.
So this isn't like an NVIDIA problem then? This could be a Livepeer problem?
At least in this case, yeah, from what we've seen, the
It
bulk of
could
it.
be, or like the LPMS, FFmpeg, C API type stuff. Hopefully it's not that, but we haven't figured that out yet.
I mean, there
Well,
are
at the
some
minimum,
things.
it's a documentation thing, right? So you're going to say when you
Right.
install and set up, you have to have a home dir. So I think at a minimum, it's that, but there should be some investigation to figure out why it does this, because that seems really odd.
Yeah, I think they'll find something. We'll probably find something in the code that's just kind of odd. It might be ignoring the data directory somewhere. And then I need to check if it's also in the orchestrator side, 'cause I understand the orchestrator also saves segments too when it gets them back from the transcoder. I believe that's correct. So yeah, it's really interesting. Now there are things on the NVIDIA side that I've noticed before. Linux doesn't always keep drivers loaded into memory. You have other things like power miser settings that you can set that keep the GPU running just a little bit faster, but the bulk of that first segment latency looks to be related to this file system issue.
Yeah, I thought maybe it was like a NVIDIA booting up issue. So I did some tests where I would run a benchmark and then start a stream to see if I could, have memory allocated or something, and it would fire off that first segment faster. But while running a benchmark or anything, it doesn't seem to affect it at all. So, based on your initial findings, how much more digging do you need to do to maybe find, like, do you see a path forward where you'll come up with an answer, or are you at a deadlock, kind of not sure where to go next?
We just found this on Saturday night, so probably this week, be doing some. I know I'll be looking at this probably this evening and trying to find out if there's something in the code that's related to it. But yeah, we're not really up against a wall yet or anything, but there's obviously a workaround or a root cause, but it would be nice if there was a fix to the code that would prevent it from happening.
Yeah, definitely. Because otherwise, go ahead, Brad.
I was gonna say I have the start or the beginning of a Grafana dashboard that I gave John access to. The range, the normal range for orchestrators on the first segment, and this is just the transcoding time, does not include upload or download timing, is like 180 milliseconds to 641 milliseconds. That's the normal range, with a lot more in like the lower third. So the 180 to like 300 milliseconds.
Yeah, and we believe this is just the file, just like the file system issue.
Yeah, there may be some code that's ignoring data directory setting, and it's just looking for the home directory anyway. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And then it's handling.
You would think that all the files and directories would have been figured out on boot, and that during transcoding, it wouldn't be bound to that stuff. Like it should just be hot and ready. You know what I mean? You should be reading and writing from the folder that's already validated. Like, why would that even play in at all?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's the way the transcoder class is initialized, and maybe it does something there. It's only on that first segment, but yeah, it'll be interesting to research. But we're so glad we fixed it, because I know I've spent countless hours. I'm thinking there were some days I spent 11 hours trying to solve this problem for months on end. It was really driving me crazy. I actually did a disk clone of the good system to the pad working system just about a week before we then figured this out separately. So a lot of work went into just find a solution. But yeah.
I think that's a pretty
thank you, man.
Yeah, super big thank you, because I feel like if the broadcaster was as strict as it should be, which is any segment sent back that's not real time, switch orchestrators, right? Like, that's a lot of orchestrators that can clearly do the work. They just can't do the work on the first segment. And that would really mess up. I think the only reason it hasn't been a big issue is because like Livepeer Inc. transcodes on their own machines in parallel, and they also have like I think 3 attempt timeouts is the default. So they'll wait a while to make sure that this orchestrator actually can't do the work before they move on. So they're being very generous. But yeah, I think if it was as strict as it could be, that first segment comes back after over real time, and you're out, right? Like I did a test stream on your thing, Brad, and one of the first segments came back on a 2-second segment came back at 4.8 seconds, and then the rest of them were coming back at like 1 second, like twice real time, right? It's like that's a 3.5 second difference in that first segment, right? So that's a problem.
And that's using your pool.
It's
so
using
that
my
you
pool,
have
so
a
who
split
knows?
and you don't know. Yeah, I was to say there's that variability of not knowing who the transcoder was, or although you're pretty good about getting rid of people that don't perform.
Yeah, I've tightened up the pool quite a bit. Now I got people yelling at me, but yeah, that's all right. Yeah, well, I dig into this a lot. I want to make sure that well, first of all, I wanted to decide if a pool setup even makes sense, right? To have this concept of it going through an orchestrator to a transcoder and back to the orchestrator and then back to the broadcaster and then to the CDN. Like so far, it seems to be pretty tough. Like people are getting kicked that have like pretty good setups. So just trying to figure out if that's even feasible, the whole pool situation. I still haven't quite figured it out. I keep working on it and just trying to see if it's even feasible. But on top of that, yeah, like we need to be able to provide like a really competitive service if we even want to think about being infrastructure providers, right? So I like all the work that's going into it. Thank you, John and Brad, for a lot of your work on this topic too.
Yeah, we were able to prove it out with two different user accounts, like just as service accounts. Just repeated those tests back and forth. It was pretty consistent. So yeah, hopefully we'll find a code fix to alleviate the network from that.
Very excited.
It doesn't seem to be too widespread, but it still should be. It still should be able to work for just so you can run in the most secure manner possible. Is that the main?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like system admins kind of outsmarted themselves in this case. We thought we were being really smart and secure by using a service account, and it turns out we were just slowing ourselves down.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that was just a fringe case that just never was tested.
Okay, do we want any other comments or topics on that first segment delay? Or did we cover that mostly?
I think it's pretty well covered. If you're not running something that has with a home directory, switch it because you'll see a big improvement.
Very cool. Okay, let's move on. I want to talk about the Innovators DAO. So for those of you that are in the Innovators DAO, we have our first inaugural vote on Snapshot. Did everyone get a chance to see the vote? And does anyone else have any comments or questions about the vote?
I think I voted. That's all you're getting from me.
Hey, that's all I ever wanted.
I have seen it. I have not voted, and I only quickly kind of scanned through the light paper, so I'm a little behind.
So far we have 3 votes in out of 14, and the 3 are approve. So That's a good start. I'll throw it into this water cooler chat as well for anyone who wants to follow along, as well as Livepeer Innovator DAO members. Go ahead and cast your vote there. You should be whitelisted to vote. It's all off-chain voting, so you just sign your wallet. There's no transaction cost, so it should make it a little more friction-free for actually running the DAO, which is what Snapshot is all about. So seems like a pretty good platform to host our DAO on and to manage everything. Lots of cool tools on there. So even when we do the voting for who gets how much distribution of tokens, we can do what's called like a multi-vote process, where you get basically unlimited votes, and what you get to do is you get to spread your percentage out amongst as many choices as you want. And so this gives us like super granularity for like giving, we could even do the voting of who gets what in Snapshot itself. So yeah, lots of cool tools. And what we'll do next probably is assign some people to build out the website a little bit more. I know that Chase and Ben were interested in maybe taking that on. So if you guys are interested, I will sign you up a WordPress account on the website, and you guys can start hammering away on it if you'd like. And then just
It wouldn't be me building a website.
we're not
I don't have the bandwidth at the moment.
No, you don't. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can help with that.
Cool. So and please log all your time in the spreadsheet. And then if anyone else has any ideas how they want to contribute, then feel free to reach out, and maybe we'll have like a quick DAO meeting after our vote is passed for assigning some roles. But in the meantime, we are also waiting for Delta to pass before we move too far ahead, because as much as the Livepeer Innovators DAO is great, if Delta doesn't pass, then this work is being done a lot of time and effort for something that might not come to fruition. So I think right now it's at a good phase. We've got members, we've got a platform, and good place to start. G2 says, how do you get access to vote? You just have to sign in with your wallet that you signed up for the DAO with. So GT, you should have the wallet, and you just sign in and vote. If you don't remember what your address was, please DM me, and I'll just confirm the address you inputted during the application.
I see a link to the membership application on the light paper. Is it too late to apply to be a member, like a video builder expert, or? Nope,
anyone can still apply.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a totally open. It's just an open application, forever. But if you didn't make it in for the initial members, then we'll have to vote you in the future. So like maybe when this vote is done, if we get 2 new members apply, or even just one, doesn't matter. We'll just throw a snapshot vote through and just being like, hey, we have XYZ member that wants to join, yay, nay, and we'll do a vote. And once it passes, then you'll get added to the list. So
that makes good sense.
It's
that's how it worked.
Yeah, it's just a continuous application. So,
cool.
Anyone can apply. And I built the application long enough to ward off people that just spam. I made it so that if you just put in a little bit of effort into the application, then it weeds out a lot of the people that are not actually going to participate. So I think the people that did fill it in, I think they put in enough energy to make it worthwhile, and now they can vote, and we can move on with the rest of the DAO. So. Yeah, pretty excited for that. Excited with the snapshot tool. I think it'll work great. But yeah, as we go forward, get some more tooling in. And as soon as... and then obviously the late paper's out. please go check out the light paper as well. So if you haven't read through it, just read through it briefly. Probably a good one to look at is just the funding structure, so you understand how that works. But yeah, we're good to go. Does anyone else have any questions about the DAO or anything about that?
So the DAO is primarily for video builders, right? Or would like something that I would want to push for is once we have some funds in the treasury, is to allocate some parts of those funds to the Arbitrum or like the Uniswap pool to increase the LPT liquidity. So would that be, or could that be part of this DAO, or should that be pushed from another DAO?
That's a good question. I mean, to like, the question is logistically, how many other DAOs are gonna form, and how well organized are they gonna be? And it's like, if we already have a good working group of 15 competent people in the Livepeer ecosystem, I don't see why the Innovators DAO couldn't do something like that, like propose to the L1 treasury, like, hey, instead of a round, we're gonna do a liquidity thing where we're gonna say, you know what, we'll create you could just Delta can or the treasury could do this in some way. So I mean, the idea that in the light paper, we explicitly express that we are trying to generate demand on the network. So I guess you could abstract out that liquidity for the network could drive demand, if you will. I don't know. So but yeah, I wouldn't be so strict as to say no. That's how I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'd have any contest putting a vote through for that. I think we would all love to have more liquidity in the pools on L2 especially, or L1. But yeah, I mean that's a great idea in my opinion.
You could easily just amend the light paper and change video builders to anyone doing anything positive for the network. Like, I don't know. I think it can be as broad as we want it. And the DAO, it can morph, right? Just because it starts off as a video builder retroactive DAO doesn't mean it can't go into video builder or orchestrator, like proactive grants where, we do the application process and we, take over the grants committee. Like, is the grants committee really going to switch over to a DAO and keep going, or are they like, so yeah, the Innovators DAO, I think, as much as it has a mandate, it's also an open book for changing. So yeah.
Cool, thanks.
And if good ideas come up, I think, yeah, just we'll propose them, and we can propose to change the light paper and then propose to change our mandate and move down a whole different direction. That's totally fine. So in the meantime, please vote, and we'll get the DAO started. And yeah, excited for where this might take us with some treasury funds. Okay, let's continue on. How do you say that? Heterotic? I thought I can't remember how he said it. You had a topic actually around story. Yeah, do you want to take us down a little story, I guess, of this project you mentioned earlier?
Sure. Absolutely. What do you think about Innovators DAO members receiving 6.25% on the back end because of encryption using Hamiltonian algorithms?
When you say 6.2% on the back end, what back end are you referring to?
25, 1/16 mostly. Boolean prefixes on the Tesseract. I don't know. Story. The Lambda Calculus. Symbolic Logic and the Game of Logic by Lewis Carroll. End-to-end encryption with federated learning. Vector databases. Encryption of vector databases as watermarking.
Sorry, I don't quite follow.
Multimodal large language models as image transcription algorithms.
AI.
The importance of labeling in ingest of visual data sets.
So, could you? You're saying a lot of words, but I'm not quite following. Is
They're
this?
all very directed at this word. Story.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Especially when it comes to multimodal learning and generative language models.
Right.
What we call golem. The golems. So there's problems in this whole space, and it's a lot to talk about theoretically. I don't want to go too far. But I will say Andreessen Horowitz, Balaji, A16Z, who the rest is? But the web page, storyprotocol.xyz, itself is mostly like a social marketing website. Honestly, they got one IP proposed, our partners, Emergence Universe, an original science fiction franchise built on protocol. ... Stay tuned. So when, but beyond that, like I said, they have, I don't know if you can call it a white paper, right? They have essentially a statement of vision. And it's actually on storyprotocol.xyz/media/vision. This is the only content on their website. Signed Jason Zhao, Jason Levy, S. Wiley. They state some requirements for internet native IP infrastructure. It's very clear that provenance is attribution. And attribution is naming.
Right.
And
Okay, but like what are
naming
you okay, hang on. What are
our
you talking
story.
about, man? What are you saying?
Yeah, could you?
There's a lot
saying
of
that
words
you
and
guys
there's
are working development right now in this space for provenance in video ingest.
Okay.
Right. That's
And
the
that's
identifying the
critical
user
and
who
pivotal
publishes.
within the entire ecosystem of what story represents. And I'm saying that if you were alive in 1928 hanging out with nuclear theorists talking about the Bohr model or something, and the nuclear bomb had not been invented yet, but then you came across an article or something that was talking about chain reactions, for example. And then you notice that a whole bunch of people were investing in these particular authors, right?
Okay.
This is a critical moment in AI. And so I see part of a potential protocol that is like quantum safe and involves end-to-end encryption and requires decentralized infrastructure and peer-to-peer networking as part of its protocol. But I also see claims like the Git of IP.
So I'm just gonna stop you there right now, real quick. I understand. So story is very cool. I like the idea of it. Are you saying it has? Does this have
You
any
already
relation?
started building it. I don't know if you're aware, but it's very important that you be. And I am for that and in support of your efforts. But video provenance is a very important topic, and this is essentially what they have to be discussing because there's no other way around it.
Okay.
In
Right,
terms
but you
of
you have to be able to explain it in
not
like you're talking about story protocol. You have to be able to
talking
explain it
about,
in simple terms because
yeah,
otherwise
okay.
nobody knows like
So
what it is. I'm
labeling,
looking at the website right now. I'm just trying to understand like the base
okay.
functionality of it, and I'm not getting that from what you're saying.
Labeling, well, because there's almost nothing. That's the other thing I'm pointing out.
Yeah,
Well,
where should we start? So, like, does it tie in with the broadcasting element, like the broadcaster, let's say, the Catalyst system or Go Live
So the
Peer?
last time I heard story within this space, because these are all NFT people, it was part of the Filmmaker DAO. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that effort, but there was a professor, Mia von Steinkirk, who had written something off of the Loot protocol, which was text embedding for metadata sequences for tagging of uh, uh, basically bitmap images or JPEGs.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard of that.
Okay. But this was an effort to develop contextual labeling for segmented images. And there's image segmentation for the AI workflow that's built through a different protocol in the NFT space. But these guys have like essentially, I think, attached to this model. And it is annotated images, basically, right? This is how you develop the scene NFTs that are being produced by Movie Shots, I think is like literally this weird names, but it's a DApp space, you know. They did like a Laurel and Hardy edition and Lola Run, or something like that.
One
For an
so
NFT.
it sounds like yeah. What it sounds like we have an interesting protocol that's doing stuff in AI and video, and I'd highly recommend everyone check out the link. I did post a link to the vision and the white paper for story. But with that being said, we're probably gonna wrap it up. We've been going for about an hour and a half now, and
Oh yeah, no. I would love to get any input, and it's in the signed video that you guys are already working on, right? That's a thread. Shan asks who pays for bandwidth. Actually, obviously, so all along the communication stack, there's attribution signatures that can be pooled and distributed costs. Obviously, there are. It turns out 16 nodes in my protocol. It's built on Hamiltonian encryption, symmetric encryption, and yeah. Let's have deeper conversations about that.
I have heard a little bit about the provenance attribution, right? Basically, attributing a video to a user who published it, right?
Verifiable on-chain video.
Exactly, right. Yeah, in so many less words, right?
Did standard implementation is
I think
critical
that
because we need compositional structure for signatures in my
right.
Hamiltonian encryption.
Right. I think where it ties in for us right now, because I've done some work on the recording side and distribution, and there is a project going on to put like recorded video into the Swarm project
Right.
for hosting and
So I do
delivery.
have like yes for ENS as well. And storage is very simple, and topping off postage stamps for topical feeds is like a real thing. So it could be a really good primitive for that. And I'm actually a grantee there, but I actually have negative utility for cash because I'm on the dole in the US. But like and for medical purposes. But like $54 million and 7 Ivy grads is a lot with 40 staff to be launched with a white paper that's half a page of drivel. And you guys have implementation so close. Let's
Yeah,
have deeper
it's
conversations.
great. Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. It's good. It's good to connect. Yeah, things are so high level in these calls, but I've got a general idea of where we're going. So, yeah, I know there are some groups working on that type of a thing. it'll be interesting to
7
work on.
sisters and a BZZ inclusion proof. That's it. That's the whole scope.
Very good.
I need 4,096 KB chunks of 2-second segment video if we can get it. I am not an MPEG orchestrator, but I'm attached to a broadcaster creative. We're
Fourth.
shipping a movie in December, I think, maybe January. Our 4th in a series.
Very cool. I like it.
Yeah.
I would love if you
How'd you guys do?
post either go in the chat in the side or just hop into like a general chat and post some of the links to
video.
post some links to this content so we can kind of follow up and read up on it as you go along. We'd love to follow. So, but with that being said,
it's everywhere, but I can't just I mean, even as much as I've said, it's only because in this space I feel comfortable enough to say what I'm saying.
right on, man.
This is Andreessen Horowitz and A16Z that got the jump through Hollywood on the filmmaker DAO,
definitely,
as far as I can tell from the lexicon
Very
and
cool.
the dev.
I'm glad you feel
So, and they have
comfortable.
a
That makes me feel very happy that I'm doing my job
Yeah.
and make people feel comfortable here. So
It
thank
just
you
means
so
that-
much for joining us. And I do appreciate everyone's time today learning about the selection algorithm and some of the DAO upgrades and the first, second transcode time and story. So thank you all for being here, trying to make the world's open infrastructure for video with Livepeer. So thanks again,
Cheers.
and we will see you all next week. Cheers.